All right. Hello and welcome. Thank you all for being here today. My name is Logan Oxenham and I'm running as the NDP candidate here in Kirkfield Park. With me today are my colleagues Bernadette Smith from Point Douglas, Malaya Marcelino, Notre Dame, and Nellie Kennedy from Assiniboia. And I'd like to give a special welcome to Chelsea Hill, who you'll hear from shortly. Many young people, families, and seniors in Kirkfield Park and across the province are renters. And they're struggling. The affordability crisis is hitting renters hard. Let's be clear, Kevin Klein isn't standing up for renters here in Kirkfield Park, but I will. Under the PC government, protections for renters were weakened and in some cases completely ignored. Families saw their rent skyrocket above the rent cap, and Heather Stephenson and Kevin Klein let it happen. Renters deserve better. The Manitoba NDP will stand up for renters who work hard every month to pay the bills. We'll make life more affordable for the hardworking people in Kirkfield Park and every renter in this province. With the NDP, you'll have a little extra to take the kids out for ice cream or head to the movies without worrying about an unfair rent increase. So to talk more about our commitments to renters, I'd like to welcome the leader of the Manitoba NDP, Wab Kinew.
Thank you, Logan. Now I for sure want ice cream now. How do you do? I'm Wab Kinew, and I'm running to be your premier so we can make rent more affordable. Now this week, we've been talking about our plan to make life more affordable here in Manitoba. We started by announcing a promise to deliver on true $10 a day childcare. That could save a family with 2 kids $1,000 over the course of a summer. Then we announced our commitment to cut the gas tax in Manitoba while inflation remains high. That could save you hundreds, perhaps thousands of dollars a year. We followed that up with our commitment to freeze hydro rates here in this province. And today, we're going to talk a little bit about our plan to make life more affordable for renters. A Manitoba NDP government will strengthen rent controls with legislation to protect renters from big rate hikes. We'll also prevent the type of situation that we saw take place at Lyons Place from happening again in our province. And we will bring in a $700 renter's tax credit here in Manitoba. Across Manitoba, there are thousands and thousands of people who rent. You know, we're talking about young people who are getting their start in life, who are building on their futures. We're talking about families, young families included, who are raising kids and looking for ways to have a little bit more resources in order to do those special things that we make memories with as families. And we're talking about seniors who during this cost of living crisis driven by inflation are very concerned about fixed incomes and how they're going to make ends meet, particularly set against the backdrop of wanting to live independently in the community. And so it's for these folks that we're announcing not just the rent control measures, but in particular this direct aid of a $700 renter's tax credit. All of these people are feeling the impact of the cost of living crisis. They're watching their monthly costs go up, and they need a little help. So we're here to help you. It's all a part of our plan to make life more affordable for families. Fact is, if you're a renter in Manitoba, you probably had your rent go up in the last few years. And not just go up by a little. I'm talking about rent increases way above what rent control is supposed to prevent. We've seen 10% increases, 20%, 30% increases. In one case, some renters faced even a 50% rent hike in just a year. That's not right. And this is all because Heather Stephenson and the PCs have allowed landlords to charge rent hikes that far exceed the provincial guidelines. Under her leadership, rent control rules are so lax that landlords can charge big rent hikes with only a few months' notice to tenants. And though tenants can challenge these increases, almost every single one has been approved since Heather Stephenson became premier. Besides, if we have rent control in this province, Should you really have to become a full-time activist just to be able to pay your bills? I think not. The current approach is broken and we need to fix it. We need to strike a new balance that tips things back in favor of you, the renters, you, the tenants, you, the folks who are struggling to pay your bills during this time of record inflation in recent memory. We've heard from many people. Deborah Kunkel comes to mind. She's a senior who faced a rent hike of $300 simply because her landlord painted the outside of their building. Lindsay Mazer, grad student who was hit with a 30% rate hike less than 2 years after a 7% increase. Or the tenants at a building in Winnipeg who spent a year fighting a 14% increase at the RTB, only to have the landlord apply for another increase immediately after. And while renters get priced out of their homes, what's the priority of Heather Stephenson and the PCs? Well, they're busy giving checks to out-of-province billionaires. They gave a $1 million check to the company headquartered in Bay Street that owns Polo Park Mall. That company didn't ask for it. They probably didn't even notice it. And that's money that was taken from our schools and shipped out of province. The PC sent another check to Galen Weston, the same person who's been posting record profits by charging you more on your groceries. We say that's the wrong approach. It's time to tip things back in favor of you, the average person here in Manitoba, and in particular, we want to help make rent more affordable in this province. Manitobans deserve better. It's time for a change. It's time for a government that works for you. We're going to stop the unfair rent increases. We're going to prevent situations like Lions Place from being repeated, and we're going to deliver a $700 renter's tax credit to help you get by. And of course, we'll stop sending checks to billionaires out of province. So that's our plan, and we want to work with you to make life better together.
Okay. Hi everyone, my name's Chelsea Hill, and I'm a renter in Winnipeg. I've been living in my apartment in my place with my partner and our daughter coming on 3 years. When I first began renting, I was splitting costs with multiple roommates, which made things a bit easier. But once my boyfriend and I got our own place, that's when I saw how much rent was impacting my monthly costs. In the area that we live in now, rent is high enough as it is. And with higher groceries, inflation, and that high cost of childcare, me and my partner are having a hard time keeping up with rent. For myself and other people with young children, we are struggling. It's getting harder to afford, to raise a family, and keep up with rent. So it's scary to think about how big a rent increase could affect our family. That's why I'm standing here today. I support the commitments that Wab and the Manitoba NDP are making for renters. As a renter, stronger rent control and the tax credit will make my family's life more affordable. Thank you.
All right. On this windy day, we're very happy to take questions that people may have.
What exactly are you proposing with respect to legislative changes for rent?
Right. Sorry.
Are we going to see a repeat of what the private members' bills that we've seen in the past, or something different?
I think that some of the approaches we contemplated in some of the bills our team has brought forward are certainly on the table. And what we need to do with legislation here in Manitoba to help you, the people who rent in this province, is right now the balance is tipped entirely in favor of the landlord. And we need to tip the scales back towards you, the renter. You still have to have respect for the landlords who want to maintain properties and invest in them, but we also need to at least have some semblance of balance for people who are struggling to get by. And so the legislation that we'll be bringing forward will include a number of measures aimed at the Residential Tenancies Board to be able to give them some strength, to be able to give rent control in this province some teeth. And that will save you money.
There's a very specific 2021 bill from Adrian Salad that talks about eligible capital expenditures would be the only time when a landlord couldn't apply for that, as well as extraordinary increase in tax as well for security costs. Is that specifically what we see here?
I think we're contemplating something similar to that. In opposition, we're sometimes limited with the parameters of what we can bring forward as a private member's bill. So you might see the language change somewhat, but basically we're talking about the same thing. I think or a similar approach is maybe a better way to say that. You know, when the average person hears about rent going up 30% and the justification for that is a new coat of paint, I think the average person thinks, well, maybe we can do better than that here in Manitoba. So we're talking about shifting that balance of power back towards the renter, back towards the tenant. And what that means is that we would have to look at ensuring that there's real improvements being made, real investments on the capital side, that the renter is certainly going to welcome because it makes their place better to stay, but also to strike that balance around affordability.
For example, that paint a coat or coat of paint or some special improvements, like are you going to more RTB kind of assessors out into the streets to go look at the properties, or are you going to make sure that they are done before improvement? Like what specifically can we be or expecting different?
Yeah, I think all of those approaches are things that we're committing to here today. But first and foremost, it's about setting an overall regulatory framework that shifts the balance back towards renters. We have rent control in name only here in Manitoba. And so we need to give rent control some real teeth. Yes, we need to work with landlords and there needs to be a balance there. But right now, 100% of the decisions go towards the landlords. And the only time you ever see any flexibility is when renters effectively become full-time activists and do petitions and do canvassing and show up on their own time and their own dime to the RTB. We're saying that that's probably not the right approach. We should have a bit more of a balance so that we can ensure that affordability is paramount when we're talking about rent in Manitoba, while of course remaining balanced in our relationships with landlords.
You mentioned Lions Place. How would this impact similar situations as the Lions Place situation?
Well, I think first and foremost from the tenant's perspective, when we're talking about a $700 tax credit, that's going to help seniors. But I think what was really upsetting for a lot of Manitobans, seniors in particular with the Lions Place situation, was the idea that buildings that had been created using public investment in the past, that had been run by not-for-profits, could all of a sudden be turned into investment plays by people out of province and then threaten the seniors who'd been living there for many, many years. And that's the sort of thing that we want to be able to prevent. So the measures that we're talking about there would mean that before a not-for-profit building hits the market, that there'd have to be an approval process.
Today speaks to oversight of affordable housing. What exactly does that mean? Are you looking for government body, or what are we talking about oversight?
Yeah, I think there needs to be that provincial oversight, a provincial approval process when we're talking about affordable housing, because these investments were made by our country and our province over the years to help seniors, to help people in Manitoba get by. And when you get a situation where all of a sudden these are just investment plays for, big funds from other provinces, I don't really think that's hitting the need that people have here in Manitoba, particularly during a cost of living crisis. So what we're going to bring forward is a process to ensure that there's some oversight and that there are approvals required before these properties can be divested and seniors are confronted with all this stress.
How will the NDP define affordable housing? So is there a percentage of someone's wage that should be spent on housing? How do you see that?
Yeah, I think that our approach is a comprehensive one. Certainly we have social housing in mind. We have affordable housing in mind, which can include setting rents relative to a person's income, but also can take a look at what's going on in the market nearby to be able to guarantee some measure of affordability. But what we're talking about here today specifically is a renter's tax credit, $700 each year to help you with rent in Manitoba, and then a suite of measures being brought forward through legislative and regulatory means to prevent situations like the one at Lions Place from being repeated, and also to tip the balance at the RTB back in favor of the renter.
Sorry, how did you say that would happen at Lions Place? You mentioned an approval process.
Yeah, an approval process I think is what we're contemplating here.
Like what sort of approval process?
Well, an approval process through a provincial body that would ensure that before a not-for-profit or a co-op divests of buildings that were designed to deliver affordable housing, that we'd ensure that the renters and that the affordability piece is kept in place.
Do you think that'd be within the RTB or external?
It could potentially be within the RTB.
The $700 renter's credit, are you proposing to just reintroduce or to restore what we had before for a renter's credit, or are you doing something different?
Effectively, yeah, Heather Stephenson cut this support for renters. And so we do think it needs to be restored, especially when you're sending these big checks to billionaire property owners who don't live in Manitoba. Like, why did they cut help for renters at the same time that they're sending money to Galen Weston or the family that owns Walmart? Doesn't make sense to me.
It would still be part of that school tax.
In terms of delivery, yeah, same approach, same sort of eligibility guidelines, but increasing the amount to $700.
You mentioned that most, if not all, of the above guideline rent increases under 7 cents were approved in the last 6 years of an NDP government. 100% of those requests were also approved. So we don't know the exact amount. Was that a mistake then if the NDP did that as well?
It's important for us to get the balance right. And what we're talking about here today is having some semblance of balance. 100% in favor of the landlord certainly is not the right approach, especially when you're talking about 30%, even 50% increases. So we've got to tip the balance back in favor of the renter. And so these measures we're talking about here today will accomplish that.
So it wasn't the right approach when the NDP did it?
You know, I think it's important to point out that the PCs are going to stand up and throw talking points at the wall to try and see what sticks. But the bottom line is this: they've raised taxes on renters at the same time that they're handing out checks to Galen Weston, to the owners of Walmart, to the owners of other big companies that are not headquartered here in Manitoba. We're saying that's the wrong approach. That should stop, and we should instead deliver affordability savings to you, people who have to pay rent here in Manitoba.
Do y'all own any properties that are rented out?
No.
Pour Radio-Canada en français,
Ouais.
vous pourriez expliquer c'est quoi le plan aujourd'hui que vous proposez pour vous attaquer à la crise de l'emploi?
Bien, aujourd'hui, nous sommes ici pour lancer des appuis pour les peuples de Manitoba, soit des aînés, soit des jeunes. Et puis surtout, c'est un coupure sur les impôts par $700. Et puis aussi des projets de loi qui pourraient rendre une vie plus abordable ici dans notre province.
Proposer une législation pour contrôler les loyers. Qu'est-ce que vous entrevoyez comme protocole de mise en œuvre, comme méthode de mise en œuvre?
Bien, pour nous, il y a beaucoup de bâtiments et puis beaucoup de logements dans notre ville que notre province et puis notre pays a investi dans pendant les dernières décennies. Et maintenant, quand on voit ce qui est arrivé à Lions Place ou ce qui arrive avec les aînés qui font face à une vie moins abordable, c'est temps d'avoir un gouvernement qui prend de l'action. Alors notre équipe, comme les NEO, seront là pour appuyer vous, les peuples du Manitoba, incluant cette coupure des impôts par $700.
One question from the Canadian press. Can you clarify that $700 is an increase from the $525 that exists right now?
Yeah, so $700 would be an increase of $525, so the total amount would become $700. And I'm sure the next question coming will be total cost, $26.7 million for the program annually.
MGEU will be serving MPI with an official strike notice on Monday morning. And the union says they are open to bargaining or negotiations over the weekend, but if no settlement is reached, the strike on Monday will be a full walkout by the entire MPI membership of those farms.
Heather Stephenson could avert the potential strike at MPI by offering a fair wage to these workers right now. This is an affordability crisis. Everybody gets that, and there's a ton of public support for workers to be paid fairly. When we saw with the liquor strike, listen, summer's too short. Why did we have to put up with closed liquor marts just because the PCs wanted to play politics? Now you're telling me going into back to school season that Manitobans who need to turn to AutoPack or MPI services are going to be faced with more disruption? Doesn't make sense. The PCs are getting it wrong right now. Heather Stephenson could prevent this situation immediately, and she should do so.
Are you satisfied with what appears to be the offer for the liquor worker, which is around over a 4-year period?
I think I'll wait for the voting to conclude before commenting on the specifics of what was offered. But I would say that summer's really short in Manitoba, and Heather Stephenson could have prevented all those weeks of disruption at the liquor marts by offering a fair wage to those workers in the first place.
Respect the hydro rates that UB approved
Yes.
a 1.4% increase in residential customers in 24-25. You're talking about a freeze. Do you think this casts any kind of doubt on what you've been proposing with respect to rates?
I think the PUB's decision actually strengthens our case for a rate freeze, because if you listen to what the board said, they said that without this terrible Bill 36 that Heather Stephenson and the PCs had brought in, you actually could have had a rate freeze right now. And so the PCs, under Premier Stephenson, brought in this law to weaken the Public Utilities Board, but thank goodness we still have a PUB in Manitoba, because they're the only thing standing in between the PCs from privatizing hydro further and making hydro rates even more expensive. So I'm very happy and confident that we will be able to deliver a rate freeze for customers of Manitoba Hydro, because the balance sheet is strong and you, the people of Manitoba, own it, so long as it's not privatized. And the reason that we own it together is to keep electricity rates affordable. So we're very keen to deliver on that pledge.
So there is a decision out of the PUB. What would be the process? Like, would an NDP government ask that for that decision to be revised, or how would we get to 0% in 2023?
Well, you know, we really respect and revere the Public Utilities Board. So what we would be contemplating is respecting the current decision that has been rendered here by the PUB, and then looking to freeze rates immediately following that rate period. Well, it's my understanding that it's going to be midway through the fiscal year, but effectively, yes, heading into that year that you're talking about there. Yeah.
In terms of the, just to go back to the rental announcement,
Yep.
The PCs did freeze rates for 2 years. Would the NDP consider a rate freeze themselves?
Yeah, certainly we would look at it, given the economic conditions around inflation. PCs have already announced that there's going to be a rent increase this coming year, and so that's why it's really important for us to come out today and say we're going to help you against that backdrop with a $700 a year renter's tax credit. Okay, merci beaucoup tout le monde. Thank you very much. Really appreciate it. Right on, Nelly. You're almost in your backyard.